Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session True Cyber Emergency Stories and Leadership Action Plans by Dan Lorman. And I am Ritika Chakraborty, and I will be the host for your day. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few house rules for our attendees. The session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, and out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any question during the webinar to the organizers or the panelists, please post your query in the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. A very important announcement for certificate of attendance. Participants need to attend the entire webinar to qualify the certificate of attendance. Participants should fill the survey form in the attendees thank you email and answer the 3 questions based on the webinar provided with the right answers. If these 2 criteria are met, then only the participant will receive the certificate of attendance within 5 to 7 working days after the webinar. Now, about our speaker. Daniel J. Lorman is an internationally recognized cybersecurity leader, technologist, keynote speaker, and author with more than 30 years of experience in the computer industry. During his distinguished career, he has served global organizations in public and private sectors in various executive leadership capacities, receiving numerous national awards, including CISO of the Year, Public Officer of the Year, the Computer World Premier 100 IT Leaders. He led the Michigan Governor's Cybersecurity and Technology Infrastructure teams from May 2002 to August 2014. He currently serves as the Field CISO Public Sector in Presidio, leading the cybersecurity advisory services for public sector clients. He has written 2 books, Virtual Integrity, Faithfully Navigating the Brave New Web, and BYOD for your BYOD for you, the guide to bring your own device to the work, and is a co-author of Cyber May Day and the Day After, a leader's guide to preparing, managing, and recovering from in- inevitable business disruption. So, now without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Dan.
Great, thank you so much, Ritika. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It's early morning in the USA Eastern Time Zone. I'm in Michigan, and I know a lot of you are around the world, in the US, but also in India and Europe. So thank you for joining us wherever you're at, and really excited about today's talk, and really want to hear your questions. I want to just do a brief introduction about the book that I'm going to be talking about today. The stories are coming from the book Cyber May Day and the Day After. And you can actually see more about the book. This fun cover here, obviously, holding it up for you to see. It was published by Wiley, came out about 14 months ago, and done very, very well on Amazon and around the world. The book is actually just a few introductory comments, and then we'll dive into the topic and some poll questions, and then dive into some true stories. Really, Shemaine Tan, my co-author, and I, right in the beginning of COVID, we're supposed to do a conference together in Australia. It ended up going virtually on the web because I couldn't travel to Australia and Sydney. And long story short, we started collaborating, working together. Stories in Asia, stories in Europe and around the United States, and really all over the world, and just try and see true stories. What really happens behind the scene during a ransomware attack. And so the book is really divided into 3 parts: what happens before, during, and after cyber emergencies, kind of through the eyes of C-suite executives, not always CISOs, but it could be a chief executive officer, a chief financial officer, and kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and lessons learned. So people really want to hear true stories, and I'm going to share a couple of those with you today. Excited to be with you, and certainly want to hear your questions as well. So feel free to put your questions in there. We will get to those in the last 15 minutes, and we will talk about those. So real excited about this topic. Want to start off with some poll questions, and so we're gonna have some questions pop up, and we'll spend about 2 minutes on each of these questions. So the first question is this: has your organization experienced a ransomware attack? Has your organization experienced a ransomware attack? And we're going to give you about 2 minutes to give us an answer, but it's going to be a simple yes. 1, 2 would be no. 3, I don't know, you're not sure. Or 4, what is a ransomware attack? So I'm imagining that most of the audience here knows what a ransomware attack is, and certainly has that experience. But some of you may not be familiar, so we're certainly going to talk about that. But this is certainly an interesting baseline, if you want to put it that way, for an audience to understand kind of who are we working with, and what is your background, and have you personally experienced that? Because we found one of our findings in the book was, people who thought they were ready oftentimes were not ready, and for various reasons. We're going to get to that at the end of the talk today, and talk about some of the reasons why, and how you can turn what we call cyber lemons into lemonade, and actually learn from those experiences. But certainly want to get your answers here. I'll give you another moment or two, and then we'll go to the second question. So please get your poll answers in, maybe another 10 or 15 seconds here, and vote. 1, yes; 2, no; 3, I don't know; or 4, what is a ransomware attack? We'll come back and visit these poll results in a second. Okay, Ritika, why don't we go ahead and close that one out, and let's go over to the second question. And we'll ask you one more poll question, then we're going to dive into the content. So the second question is this: is your organization prepared now to respond to a major cyber attack or ransomware incident? Are you ready? Are you ready for an attack now? Do you think you are? And so the 4 answers here are yes. We have tested plans that are all set. So you have plans that are tested, and they're ready to go. 2, we're probably ready. Probably, but let me double check. You're not quite sure, you're not as confident as a 1, but you think you're probably ready. Number 3 would be I'm worried, I'm not confident, I'm concerned that things are not ready to go. That would be 3, I'm worried, not confident, and 4, little humor here again, but I think most of you probably won't answer this, but what is a ransomware attack? So basically, those are the options. Want to see here what the answers are in the first grouping, and interesting numbers there. But I'm going to give you another minute or so to answer this, and then just want to get some feedback from you on, are you ready to go or not? And so just got to look here at some of the results we had. In the first answer, we had 21% said yes. We had 65% said no, so they have not experienced a ransomware attack. We had about 13% that didn't know, and somebody said, 1% said, what's a ransomware attack? So good for you. Thank you for that. That was our first answer, and we'll go ahead and close out this next poll. Go ahead and close that out and send those results on over, Ritika. So we'll close out the second question. Thank you all for your answers. Come back here in a bit, and we'll look at this in more detail, and we'll see some of those results. So thank you. We appreciate that. Well, I want to talk about ransomware overall, and if we look at the last several years, and we think about SolarWinds, we think about Colonial Pipeline here in the United States, the number of ransomware attacks just soaring, and then this Inc. magazine article from last year, most businesses don't survive ransomware attacks, what to do in the aftermath to soften the blow. So, I mean, really, if you think back over the last several years, ransomware has been devastating. Now, I do an annual blog on the top predictions for the coming year and the top stories from the previous year. And certainly for 2022, I'd have to say it was Ukraine and all the impacts. You can go out to my blog, Lorman on Cybersecurity. That's LOHRMANN, Lorman on Cybersecurity. And you can read about all the impacts from Ukraine and all the things that happened. Certainly, we had an abundance of ransomware attacks in 2022 as well over the last year. 2020 and 2021, it was the top story in a wide variety of ways, really going back to 2019 when it was really hitting state and local governments hard in the United States. That continued in 2021. Also in 22, we saw attacks against hospitals. There was a hospital in Paris that had a $10 million ransom demand, shutting down NHS in Ireland, National Health Service, hospitals throughout the United States being impacted, but state and local governments being impacted, schools being impacted. A lot of predictions in 2023, and I do a prediction report every year looking at the future years, people suggesting that ransomware will become much bigger in Europe, and it's going to be growing in other parts of the world. But certainly it's been one of the top stories, if not the top story, really over the last several, say that's 3 years prior to the Ukraine attack, of Russia moving into Ukraine, the war there in Ukraine and the cyber impacts of that. It has been really the top story for the past 3 years, and I don't think any experts would debate that. So one of the things I just want to point out here, Colonial Pipeline, some of these different stories we talk about in the book, really did change the dialogue. It brought it home for many, many Americans. It brought it home for people around the world to think that now long gas lines, there were physical impacts to these attacks. It was certainly about money, but it wasn't just about money. It was now bringing down critical infrastructure. It was about other impacts to hospitals, literally someone dying in Germany, impacts to people's surgeries and medical care, impact to governments and businesses in the United States. In Baltimore, for example, when they had their attack, they couldn't issue deeds for people buying and selling properties, couldn't collect taxes. There was a lot of different impacts in Philadelphia and Atlanta and local school districts in Texas and Florida and all around the countries. The other thing that's been happening, of course, is we've also seen an increase in the ransom demands have gone up and have been higher. So I think generally speaking, your audience, you all are in this field, you understand how devastating it can be, the importance of it. But what does it really look like when it happens behind the scenes? So I want to talk about one story. I want to read you a short story. I'm only going to read one thing. I'm going to tell the other stories as we go through this presentation. But I want to say that I really do think that, we talk about COVID, we talk about the global pandemic, really did hit a crossroads globally with more and more people online and not in line. We've been talking about that for 2 decades in the United States regarding government services, but more and more services being provided, kind of an acceleration of trends that were already happening around the world, but people working from home, more and more in the United States. Some are going back to the office now, but still more of a hybrid environment, probably never go fully back to the way things were before the pandemic. But that also has created a huge opportunity for cyber criminals. And the reality is that there's been more and more opportunities for cyber attacks to impact businesses, to infiltrate businesses through people's home computers. The mixture of home and work is never before. That work-life balance and that 7x24 kind of lifestyle has become front and center. So I want to start off actually by reading one story from the book and kind of give you a sense of what we say when we talk about what's in the book, but also what happens when a ransomware attack hits. And so this is from chapter 5 and page 83 in the book. Where were you when the sirens went off? Your network has been locked. You need to pay $30 million US now. The following was an actual real-life negotiation between a ransomware gang and a $15 billion US victim company that was hit with a $28.75 million ransom demand in January 2021. After a few rounds, the victim company countered with a $2.25 million offer, which was met with a scornful response by the ransomware criminals. I paraphrase those here. It's very funny to watch a few of your admins trying to install MS Exchange server in 3 days and you can't do it. We've encrypted 5,000 of your 6,000 servers if we do some simple calculations, your expenditure is like, let's say $50 per hour, or maybe you even are more generous, $65 per hour. So 24 hours spent to restore one server, multiplied by the number of servers encrypted by us, that's like $10 million in just labor expenditure alone. Now, it's interesting to note here, a little side note, oftentimes cyber criminals are better at quantifying the cost of an incident than the business company themselves. You know, what would it mean if we lost all of our connectivity, all of our internet access, all of our ability to do electronic transfers and digital business? You know, what would it cost us per hour, per day? But I digress. I want to keep going here. They continued. Don't forget, you spent all this time on installation, and oops, you can't even restore any data because it's gone for the next 1,000 years. They added the time factor pressure at the end of the message, but they also showed some mercy at the same time. The timer's ticking. The next 8 hours, your price tag will go up to $60 million. So either you take our generous offer and pay us $28.75 million, or invest in quantum computing, a little humor there, right, to expedite the decryption process. When the company asked for additional time, the crooks countered by writing back, I don't think so. You aren't poor and you aren't children. If you're effed up, you have to meet the consequences. A day later, the company finally managed to get the authority to pay $4.75 million. The extortionists agreed to lower their demands to $12 million on the condition that the remaining amount be paid within 72 hours. After a few additional messages, they came to an agreement where the criminals promised the following. The hackers would not launch any new cyber attacks. The company would get the tool to fully decrypt the encrypted data. Number three, the hackers would completely leave the network and never target them again, if you believe them, right? Number four, the hackers would give the company access to the data to delete it themselves. The data would never be published or resold. And number five, the hackers would provide a full report on their actions, how they got into the network, how the attack was carried out. This is my favorite part here, including tips for improving security and protecting against penetration from other hackers. The company ultimately paid an $11 million ransom. So again, that's just one story from the book. I just wanted to point that out. But fascinating, you know, the tension happens in that moment, those few first moments, those few first steps that people take are so critical. Who you're going to contact, how are you going to contact them? Will you even be able to access your plant in those moments? I mean, I've seen companies that were hit by ransomware where the first thing they did was they encrypted all the incident response plans, and people couldn't even access who to call, where to call, who to go to, because all that data was encrypted. So is that even available via another source that was not encrypted by the criminals? I mean, there's so many things in those first moments. It's just like a paralyzation, almost like getting the message that you have a major health emergency in your own personal life. I mean, it can be paralyzing, and it can be really scary when that happens. So moving on, I want to just go through a couple of topics. It would just give you some samples from the book and some real stories of really what happens. As I mentioned, the book is divided into three parts. The first part is what, you know, before cyber incidents. The second part, there's like 4 chapters in each section. What happens after you're hit? And obviously that was in that part, chapter 5, you know, during an emergency, during that disruption. And then the third part is really, you know, afterwards. How do you clean up? How do you prepare? How do you learn from what just happened and then make it better so that it wouldn't happen again and you're more prepared for other attacks that might happen in the future? Well, back in chapter 1, we asked the question, if I had a time machine. And interestingly enough, we started with this concept, and I think we all seen movies like Back to the Future where the DeLorean is and things, you know, asking the question of people, what would they do differently? What would they do now that they've gone through a cyber attack? Maybe they've gone through a ransomware attack. They've gone through a major hit to their company, and what do they wish they had known? And if they could go back in time, if they could get on a time machine and get in a, you know, Back to the Future DeLorean or somehow, which obviously you can't do, but if you could go back in time, where would they go and what would they do differently? One of the things is when you ask it, you can certainly ask that question about any area of life, right? But if you ask that question to a lot of individuals, They think initially, well, I would go back to this moment and do this thing. And then they start thinking some more and they realize, well, maybe I'd go back further, because even if I could go back in time to that one moment, would I have the influence? Would I have the knowledge? Would I have the information that I needed to prevent this from happening? And maybe many times they discover they need to go further back or further back or further back and take steps they wish they had taken with the team, with practicing, with tabletop exercises that they didn't, that in fact did not take. So we've talked to some leaders around the world, and it's amazing how many, again, this was several years ago. I think it's getting better now. I think it's improving, but it's like, do they even really want to know? How hard are they really even looking for challenges, for problems? What is their perspective? And in one example we have in the first chapter about a large airport, and the leader took some persuasion to even get them to do an external penetration test and really look at a totality of what we call risk assessment, or really get a good grasp around what all the problems are. It's amazing how many leaders still, they may have a risk assessment, they may have, they want to close audit findings or things, but they want to limit the scope because they don't want, on their watch, they don't want to know like the whole broad scope of what might or could go wrong, or the totality of the problem, which is a problem in and of itself, of course. Well, in this case, after the leadership was persuaded to go ahead and do this, it was a good thing that they did, because when this former FBI agent tells the story, they found an amazing amount of documents that were openly available via the internet. And some of these documents included like floor plans of the airport, ways to get in and around security, already filled out documents that would allow access for badges and cards, lists of different top executives and people that were flying on flights, air marshals, and when they were flying, details of the strengths and weaknesses of the security, location of cameras, location of different types of people and their schedules. I mean, basically everything a terrorist organization would want to know was available openly if you knew how to get there on the internet, and it was not even encrypted. It was available without too much difficulty to access. The scariest thing of all was it is available in multiple locations all over the world, not just in one country, not just in the US, but Europe, Asia. It was globally available to the audience. So again, the question of, asking yourself, what could you do differently? How can you prepare now? What steps have you already taken? What things have you put in place are so key. So then we go further in this, and we have a wide variety of takeaways. And we interviewed a wide variety of executives. And by the way, the stories are not just from Shemaine Tan and myself, Dan Lorman. We've interviewed CSOs, CEOs, CFOs, people from all over the world, and learned different things, and former CISOs like Deb Snyder from New York, who now works for eRepublic. So board of directors, executives, and asked them, what are the things that they've learned over the years, and how would they emphasize the importance of this topic. Three points I'm going to make today. There's a lot more in the book, but takeaway number one was the world will never be immune from cyber attacks. I think, again, if you're in the security field, you may feel like, well, this is pretty obvious, but it's not so much. In many cases, people think, well, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's always like these things are going to go away. I remember back in 2010 time frame, I've been blogging for more than 15 years. I've written several books, as Ritika mentioned earlier, and people were saying, well, by about 2020, security will just be built in all of our projects. It'll be so easy, and we won't have to worry about these problems anymore. Well, the reality is the opposite is happening. The security industry is growing largely because the threats are growing. The bad actors seem to still be ahead of the good actors, and although we're catching up, it seems like the amount of resources and the amount of cybercrime is increasing year after year after year. Also, with nation states getting involved in the amount. The solutions are not just technology solutions. It requires people, process, and technology. And we know that from our experience, the reality is that the hardest part is the people part. And that means getting the right talent. I know many of you are EC Council, getting certified, and you're growing in your career. And that's why you see the opportunities. And we do have a shortage of cybersecurity professionals globally. Oftentimes, the people and then the process. I mean, of course, technology is very, very important, but keeping things going when people leave, having repeatable processes, it's got to continually be a priority. It's got to be front and center, almost like whether you're running an airport, whether you're running any kind of major business, an online enterprise, you got to keep that going 724, 365. It's really important that you think about people, process, and technology. And we give examples of that in the book. CISO leadership, the qualities of the leader. You've got to have someone responsible and accountable, and they need to be able to work well with all their partners and peers throughout the enterprise. And that reporting structure, the governance is vital. These are all things that we talk about in detail in the CISO training. But the reality of that governance model, the relationships, having a good working relationship. I just mentioned this here that, it's so important. And I'm going to tell a story at the end about this. It's going to drive this point home even further. But if you don't have trusted relationships, you will not be successful in recovering from a ransomware attack or major incident, because will all the people around you in your company, in your government, will they follow you? Will they work with you? Will they listen to you? How will that work? That reporting structure and that trust is central to success. So that's one big takeaway. Another one, it's a business risk issue. It's not just an IT issue. It's just not a technology issue. It really, when you start talking about supply chain attacks, which opened eyes like SolarWinds and others, we think it's if, but it's not really if, it's when an incident occurs. There will be, and it may be directly in your company, it may be a supplier, it may be a partner of yours that gets hit, and then it impacts your software. But there certainly are damaging downstream consequences. So the question is, when it happens, how will your organization react? How will you respond? Are you learning from cyber incidents of others? Are you looking at your peers and really thinking about this in the same way you think about business risk? What I mean by that is every company thinks about, okay, what if we have sales go up or down, or what if we have a recession? 2023 here, that's a big fear. Davos, they're meeting right now in Switzerland. They're talking about what will this look like for 2023. And while there's some optimism, there's also a lot of pessimism, thinking the economy is going to go down. What does that mean for the bottom line of the business? Well, this is another business risk. And for the first time, cybersecurity, I saw just announced yesterday that cyber is one of the top business risks that are out there, and it's listed in that top list of business risks. So, certainly if the business fails, you don't need cybersecurity. So this is really part of the business. It really needs to be thought of enterprise-wide with the CFO, with the other partners, with your media strategy, how you work with your partners, how you work with your colleagues, how you work with your clients and customers. These are all important pieces to think about. And then third, act and adjust with resilience when cyber situation evolves. There's a true story from the book. Deb Snyder talks about when she was New York's CISO in the state of New York government, and they were ready for cyber attacks, and they were prepared to help some school districts that got hit by cyber ransomware attacks. But then it ballooned, and it became, 1, 2, 3, 4, it grew. And so then it wasn't just a few, it was several of them, and they were able to contain it. And I think at about 8, 9 school districts that got hit at one time, but they realized that they were not really ready. If it had gotten to much bigger, they would not have been ready. They had no plan for it growing to be 20 school districts, or maybe, God forbid, 50 school districts. So, they had to realign their whole plan. They had to prepare and practice. So clearly everyone needs to have tabletop exercises. You need to have plans. You need to think about the roles and responsibilities in that plan. Who's going to go where? What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? There needs to be resilience in that, and some what if scenarios about if things were to escalate. We need to be ready to adapt to new situations and scenarios. And again, there's several stories in the book that highlight this and give examples of that. Clearly, it's not just a matter of saying it's never going to happen to me. More and more companies, almost everyone thought almost everyone we talked to who had been hit by a ransomware attack said, we did not think it would happen to us, but it did. And the number of attacks and the amount of devastation that's happening around the globe continues to grow. So we need to keep thinking about that. Well, I want to jump ahead now to chapter 6 and talk about this story. Where do we go when the power goes off? And this story actually goes back 20 years to 2003. Some of you think, well, how can I learn anything about cyber in this? But the lessons that came from this story, one of the things that became very clear to me early in my career as a CISO, but also just from this story and other stories, is you really need to think about, as we talk about this being a business risk, an all hazards approach to cybersecurity. So we, as companies, we think about, what if a fire, flood, tornado, natural disaster hit? How would that impact the company? Are we prepared for that emergency situation? How would we respond? For example, in Florida, they're used to dealing with hurricanes. Different parts of the world have different types of natural disasters or fires or floods. And we prepare for that. In the same way, we need to be preparing our emergency responders and people for what if a cyber attack happened. So let me take you back there. It was in August of 2003. I was in Michigan State government. I was the state CISO at the time. I was also a member of our emergency response team. I was the coordinator for Michigan's Department of Information Technology in Lansing, Michigan. And it was a hot summer day, and all of a sudden, like around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was like in the 90s outside, all the power went off. Everyone kind of looked around. There was still light in the room because, you know, we could see in the windows, we could see the sunshine still, but everyone kind of scurried. The meeting ended. Everyone just kind of ran and then trying to get home, figure out where they wanted to go. I remember just trying to get out of the parking garage was a real challenge. I was on the 4th floor, I think, of a parking garage a few blocks away where I parked my car, and there were accidents happening all over the place because all the lights were out or blinking lights, and people were just rushing to try and get places, and people were hitting other cars, and just getting out of the garage took me a half an hour. I remember hearing on the radio, right as I'm driving back to the emergency coordination center where we were meeting, and they had a generator there to have power. The radio said, at National Public Radio in the US, that it was another cyber attack. Remember, this was about less than 2 years after 9/11. And there were fears that this was, you know, Washington was hit or other people were hit. Turns out it was really only the Northeast, but it did impact Michigan, Ohio, New York, people up through the Northeast part of the United States, all the way through New York City. And it was different amount of times for different people. And in Central Michigan, we were down for maybe 18 hours in Central Michigan. Detroit and other parts, it was like 2 days. It was longer. Before the power came back, almost 2 days, less than 2 days, but different parts of the country had different levels. But interestingly enough, when it happened, we showed up at the Emergency Coordination Center, and one of the first lessons right out of the gate you learn that we can apply to cyber emergencies is who's going to show up? Who's going to show up when a major emergency happens? A lot of times you think, well, of course it's going to be everyone who's, you know, responsible, everyone on the team. Well, it turns out initially only about half the people we thought were going to show up showed up. And then over the course of the next 4 days, we ended up getting about 2/3. So a third of people never showed up. They may say, well, what happened? Where'd they go? Well, some of them were just on vacation. The leader of the whole effort, who was supposed to be in charge, Captain John Ort, was actually on vacation in Mexico, and he was legitimately there. So other people went home to check on their family, to check on their kids. They had no power at home. Their spouses were calling, you know, and getting in touch with them. They couldn't. In some cases, couldn't even get in touch with them because all the phone lines were down. So they wanted to go home and check on their family, and some of them came in late. So who are you going to call? Who's going to be available? So one lesson right out of the gate for cyber emergencies, I often tell people, if you're having a tabletop exercise or you're having a test, one of the first things you can do is go around the room, tap a third of the people on the shoulder and say, you have the day off, or you can either watch from a distance, or you can, you can basically not communicate with the team because you're on vacation. You're not here when the emergency hit, and see what happens. It'll be interesting to see the results of that. I've seen this in a number of different organizations where they're like, no, don't pick Frank, pick Sarah, Pick someone else, because the person you pick is maybe the most knowledgeable person, and their whole plan was built around that individual being available, and then now they're not available. So who's going to be available? Who's going to be able to respond is a big issue. How are you going to communicate is a second issue. All the phone lines were down. Now, some of us had what we call emergency phone service, GETS at the time, where we could still make calls, had priority phone service. But what if the internet's down? What if you can't communicate via email? What if you can't communicate by your cell phones? What if different situations come up where you're not available? Those are all important things to think about that might happen. And then also, what if scenarios around priorities? One of the things we learned was we were not expecting water to be a big issue, and there was no, we had to close down restaurants in Detroit because there was no power, but there were still people trying to serve, believe it or not, spoiled food because there was no, refrigeration, there was no freezers, but people had food and they were doing candlelit services. And literally, we had food inspectors. We had to support food inspectors, but communicating with them was very difficult. There were a number of scenarios that we had not thought through. So, having scenario-based plans around different scenarios is important. You need to think through that and think through who's going to be involved, who are you going to contact, how are you going to do it, what if those means are not available, what alternatives will you have? And all of those things could happen in a cyber attack as well as a natural disaster. Let's move on now and talk about chapter 11 and a couple more stories here, and then we're going to take your questions here in about 7 or 8 minutes. We'll jump over to your questions. In chapter 11, which is after the incident, we talk about turning cyber incident lemons into organizational lemonade. What we really mean by that is, what would you do different? And we often ask people, in the book, we talk to people and said, why? You thought you were ready. You thought you were ready, but it turns out you weren't, and this and that and this and that went wrong. What these different challenges happen. What could you do differently? Well, we broke this down. This is not all of them. This is just 5 of the areas, but there are a number of other areas we mentioned in the book, more than 10. But excuses why best practices were not implemented. And some of the excuses are basic excuses like, well, we just didn't have the time, or our organization is different. Well, let me tell you, every organization thinks they're different. Every organization thinks they're different. And of course, there are differences. There are things that are unique about your organization. But the truth is, you can learn from peers, and you're very similar to others, so you can learn from them. The vendor told us it wasn't necessary. So what can you do about some of these? Let's just go through 3 examples. We did not have the time. Well, ask the question now, before it happens. Where are we spending the bulk of our time? Are we allocating our time proportionately according to the criticality of the risks? What are some tips to help a project management team to really think about, okay, we got to get all these things done, identifying the management, how can we find the time and the resources to be able to get those done? Our organization is different. Ask, how have we educated our stakeholders to raise their level of awareness? Who are the security champions who can influence laterally and upward? So it's not always a security team. Remember, this is a whole organization's involved in this. Sometimes the best champions come from the financial office or one of the business units and not from the security team. Every company thinks they're different, so culture change and leadership is required. And then the vendor told us it wasn't necessary. How are we cross-checking what our third-party experts are telling us? Who is ultimately responsible for customer data and trust? Ask who, what, when, where, and how. Let me give you 2 more. It was too hard. It sounds like a pretty simple question to ask. And people say, look, we did A, B, and C, but we didn't do D, E, and F, or X, Y, and Z. So what's an example of what I'm talking about here? We often hear that people do backups for their systems. And one of the best things you can do for ransomware is have good backups, right? The question is, do you test those backups? Gartner said at a recent conference that something like 4 out of 5 companies don't do full extensive restores of their backup systems because it takes too much time and money. It's too laborious, and they don't, they like, oh, we know the backups are good, but then when something happens, they find out the backups aren't good, or they don't have enough data, or wasn't done, timely. Maybe it's a month old, and it's not the level of detail that the business really needs to recover in a timely manner. So have you tried getting allies so that it's not just your team fighting organizational battles? Are there smaller steps you could take? Time and resources along with priority follow through are required. And so really understanding, you can't really even know if it was too hard until again after the fact, because you didn't even go to those steps. You said, well, I'm doing everything okay now, but are you really going through all the steps needed to make sure those backups are tested and you're following all the other best practices that are out there? And then last but not least, we were afraid of what we might discover. Are you comfortable with not knowing what the malicious actors and attackers likely already know about your organization now? How are you managing your risks if you don't even know what needs to be managed? So ongoing risk assessments are required. Cyber risks do not just stop at us. We must think about our customers and our data. So, really looking at a 360-degree view of the data end to end, from their mobile devices, from the servers, from across the internet, encryption, all of those things need to be considered. I want to just say one final story and final thought, and then I'm going to open up to some questions. And this story may seem a little bit unrelated to ransomware, but I'm going to tell you how this directly links back to something I mentioned earlier, and also why this is certainly something that is very, very relevant for cyber teams today, for security teams, technology teams, and really it's important to build that trust. So I want to take you back to a story that happened to me back in 2004. And I was the CISO in the state of Michigan. My boss at the time was Terry Takai, who was a CIO for the state of Michigan. Terry came from Ford Motor Company. She went on to become CIO in California under Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then she also went on after that to become the CIO for the U.S. Department of Defense. So Terry, very, very, very good at what she did, very competent, and really a great leader. But, at the time, we didn't know each other very well. And they say a lot of organizations go through those phases of forming, storming, norming, and performing. So you're kind of going through that storming phase now, or just kind of getting to know Terry a little bit. Well, anyway, early in the time I was working for Terry, she gave me a task. And that task as a CISO, a chief security officer, was to securely put Wi-Fi in all of our state conference rooms. Well, this is more than 20 years ago now, right? So now everyone thinks, well, Dan, come on, we have Wi-Fi everywhere, right? They're in McDonald's, they're in airports, they're everywhere we go, coffee shops. But at the time, it was a lot of problems with Wi-Fi. And I had a lot of white papers, reports from three-letter agencies, FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA in the US, saying Wi-Fi was a bad idea. It wasn't secure. You couldn't do it securely. There was also a lot of reports in papers, in the media, how people were doing something called war driving. You may remember war driving. War driving is where you were driving around with your car and you could break into almost anybody's Wi-Fi just by driving up to the curb of the building, and they would have no password, no security, and you could just log right in and easily get access. And so war driving was a big problem. And there were people that were going to like Home Depot and Lowe's and stores in the US, and they were sitting in the parking lots and they were literally accessing cash registers, and it was very easy to hack, Social Security, credit card numbers and data from the cash registers. And it was very easy to hack. So I had all these stories, all these reasons. I was from NSA as my background at the National Security Agency, and I was like against Wi-Fi. So I was the CISO that was just going to say no. And by the way, CISOs are known for saying no. We're known for the answer is no. What was the question? And so we're always kind of trying to say no a lot. But I went in and I said, Terry, at this meeting, we got to the agenda item, and I said, she said, Dan, tell us all how we're going to do this securely and put Wi-Fi in all of our conference rooms. And I handed out sheets of paper, and I said, Terry, we're canceling this project. We're not doing Wi-Fi. This is not a good idea. It's not secure. And so Terry said, stop. I want everyone to leave the room but Dan. So this room emptied. Everyone just, about 10 people from Terry's staff meeting all left. The meeting just ended right in the middle. Never happened before, never happened again in my career. Terry comes walking down, everyone left. She's looking across at me and she said, Dan, if that's your answer, you can't be the CSO in Michigan. And I said, Terry, no, wait, let me explain this to you. I'm telling you why I'm saying these things I'm saying about why this is not secure. She said, no, Dan, stop. I read those articles. I read all about Home Depot and Lowe's and all these people getting hacked. I read about, I know about the security issues. We know you're smart. You come from NSA. You got a master's degree from Johns Hopkins. You're a smart guy. But I've been to Dow, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, and they all have Wi-Fi in their conference rooms. What do they know that you don't know? I'm giving you 1 week to find out, and I want a plan in place. And so that was a real moment in my career that was a shock to me, right? I was really shocked, and like, I'm like, of course, I went back and we did Wi-Fi. You know, I told my team, we're doing this. We called Dow, Ford, Chrysler, GM. We found out things we didn't know before. We put together a plan. 2 years later, we rolled that plan out over the next 2 years. 2 years later, we won an award for the top Wi-Fi security project in all 50 state governments nationwide. So we were we learned from that. But I learned a larger lesson, and explain to you why this affects ransomware. It's really about how do you get to yes? How do you build trust? So many times in our careers, we get asked, we need to do this or that, and we say no, whether it's cloud computing or artificial intelligence or bring your own device to work, BYOD. You know, it could be lots of different things. And the solution has got to be get to yes with the right level of security, on time, on budget, with the right level of security. So how do you get to yes? How do you bring the organization solutions and not just problems? How do you do that in a way that is really building trust with your team members? So how does this impact ransomware? It impacts it greatly, because in that moment, when you have an attack, a cyber attack, will the people in your organization follow you? Will they trust you? Are you known as an enabler, somebody who they can talk to, somebody who they can relate with, somebody who's a leader, who can communicate, who can get to yes, who can balance, you know, ease of use with security and really come up with really good solutions? So we need to learn to enable, not just disable. And especially for cyber incident response and recovery, people need to be able to trust you as a leader at that moment. And if they don't trust you, they're going to bring somebody else in from the outside to run that incident. It won't be you. So be prepared for that. Be an enabler now in all the things you do. Go to lunch, do meet with the business, and really have good relationships. Those relationships are key during an emergency. We're out of time now. We're going to go to some questions. I want to stop there. I want to just mention we got about maybe 12, 14 minutes for Q&A. You know, you can certainly contact me. There's contacts here if you want to talk more about this. And I think we have a Q&A section here. This is my contact information. The last slide here is Q&A. I'm going to leave this other slide up for contact purposes if you want to reach out to me. But Ritika, we can go to some questions from the audience now. We got about 12 or 14 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dan. And actually, this was a wonderful session, and we have actually received so many amazing like questions also, as well as we have got some feedbacks also, comments also. Uh, Before we start the Q&A, I would like to inform the audience that today's session is in sync with EC Council's CCSO certification. Certified Chief Information Security Officer is an executive level program that covers what you should know about information security from an executive management point of view. It combines all the components required for this C-level position, including audit management, governance, IS controls, human capital management, strategic program development, and financial expertise. Over 6,000 chief information security officers jobs opening, and an experience that certified CISO professional in the US can earn between 196,000 to 2,000 or $260,000. If you are interested to know more, kindly take part in the poll, which is going to start now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you. Now we will take the questions. So our first question is, uh, do you think bug bounty programs have had a positive impact towards preventing similar attacks, and the companies that have been resistant to bug bounty programs are more prone to such attacks?
So which programs do I think they help? Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, it is um The question is, do you think bug bounty programs have had a positive impact toward preventing similar attacks, and the companies that have been resistant to bug bounty programs are more prone to such attacks, ransomware
I
attacks?
do think, yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, bug bounties clearly help. And I would even add into that, it helps if this little commercial message here, but I believe EC Council getting certified, walking through these things, the more we learn in all of these areas help. And so bug bounties clearly look, the ability to um, find bugs in advance, the ability to close vulnerabilities, the ability to know how the supply chain is working and what software and what protections are being applied. Absolutely, they all help, and I think that's why the organizations that have those programs now, are they immune from ransomware? No, of course not. There's no single silver bullet that solves this problem. But the simple answer is absolutely it helps. And having bug bounties, being able to look at vulnerabilities in your code, being able to work with the global audience, being able to do pen testing, penetration testing with a wide variety of resources are all very good steps in the preventative side from your organization being hit. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dan. Our next question is, in a scenario where the CISO is not seen as an executive role and with less resources, what should be the best approach to protecting the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There are a lot of organizations where they are. So I mean, I clearly, in the U.S., certainly more and more, certainly the banks, the top companies, they are in the C-suite. It's being required more and more. And I think globally, probably in the EC, you're going to see a trend even more and more and more. It's going to be required that you have cyber expertise in the boards. Insurance companies are requiring that. So broadly speaking, the direction is it's going that you have to have a seat at the table in the C-suite. That being said, if you're in an organization now where that's not the case, you've got to really do a couple of things. You've got to really ensure that you have champions in the board, whether that's the CIO, whether that's the CFO, whether that's others, building partnerships. I have whole blogs and talks, and come back and do another one, just on, how do you get buy-in when you don't have it, and there's a lot of different of examples. Read my blogs. I can give you many more examples of this. And literally, I could spend half an hour just talking about all the different ways you can do this. But really building executive support. You can work with committees. You can get buy-in from the business areas. Find champions in the business who have the ear of top management and who support you. You'll be surprised. Sometimes I've seen organizations where individuals you would not expect would be supporting security are some of your biggest advocates. And it may be that they had a personal identity theft in their family, or something bad happened in a previous company and they lived through a ransomware attack, or a wide variety of reasons why your allies in cybersecurity may be different than you think. And so building that partnership, building the case, looking at your peers, looking at what others in your industry are doing, and making those cases, bringing those case studies to management for what you need. And again, there's whole sessions on how to get buy-in when you don't have it. I've done whole webinars just on that topic that are 45 minutes, and a lot of little tips you can use. But certainly encourage you to visit my blogs on building the case for a security program and getting buy-in when you don't have it. But certainly the trend is more and more executive buy-in, more and more executive leadership, more regulation around requiring companies to have that.
Thank you, Dan. Uh, our next question is, what's a good strategy guide to creating an effective incident response plan?
Yeah, so great question. It's a whole section in the book on that. We have resources. You can, I mean, I would say starting with there are so many really good templates out there. I would say go to NIST, NIST, NIST.gov, the CSRC, which is the Cybersecurity Resource Center, csrc.nist.gov has got some great examples you can use. Also, the cybersecurity framework. Really kind of doing a risk assessment of where your organization is at, points you to incident response plans. There are many organizations that post them, and in the USA, in government, for example, I'll give you one. Michigan, I helped build, going back a decade now, we were the first state to do it, what's called the Michigan Cyber Disruption Strategy. And I described that in detail in the book on how that was built and how we got buy-in. A big part of it is not just the plan itself, which is important, but testing the plan, making sure you've got all different parts of the organization involved, including your partners involved in that plan, and that it's a living document, not just a one and done, oh, we did that 4 years ago, because a lot of the people have probably changed. A lot of the phone numbers have changed, the contact lists. Have you practiced that? Have you done tabletop exercises? All of that is covered in the book, but I certainly think NIST is a great resource. And the cybersecurity framework, CSF, is a great framework. Look at the Michigan Cyber Disruption Strategy. It's out there. You can access a lot of these documents on the web for free. Most states in the USA have them, and I know many countries have them. Not sure about every country having them, but some of them are not available openly on the web. Some are, but there's a lot of great templates you can use on the web that'll help you build an incident response plan.
Thank you, Dan. Next question is we can take more two questions only. The next question is, what do you mean by enable not disable? Does this contradict the performance of security positive failure over as a secure way of IPS?
No, enabling, not disabling. So let me go back to that slide and just mention it again so people know what I'm talking about. Look, my whole career has been about cybersecurity. I started at the National Security Agency. Clearly, we've got to be securing these systems. I'm not saying leave them open, leave them vulnerable, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when your management comes to you and says, hey, I want to do this project. The example I gave was Wi-Fi from 20 years ago, but it could be cloud computing. I want to put data in the cloud. I don't want to have our own data center anymore. Or I want to use this new artificial intelligence system. Or I want to use Internet of Things devices for our shop floor, and we need to use this new IoT. You can't be the person that just says no. That's what I mean by that. If you're a CISO, I almost got fired because I said, no, we're not doing Wi-Fi. What I'm saying is you not need to provide a secure Wi-Fi, a secure cloud solution, a secure Internet of Things solution, a secure way of doing machine learning or artificial intelligence, a secure way of doing fill in the blank. That's what I mean by that. And so what I'm saying here is this. Look around you. You say, well, there's no way to do this securely, Dan. I would challenge that. Look around you. Who else is doing it in the industry? What is the best practice? I was in Michigan state government, and we were not bleeding edge, cutting edge. Yes, there was a lot of insecurities in Wi-Fi 20 years ago, and we needed to update them. So we learned things from Ford, from Chrysler, from Dow, from General Motors. And when we learned that, we applied those to our projects to make sure we did do Wi-Fi, but we did it securely. We did it in a secure manner. So on time, on budget, with the right level of security. That's the key. So I am not saying you compromise security. Somebody once said another way of explaining this is when you fly on an airplane, around the world, there's three levels of service, maybe four, but three. There's coach, there's economy, there's business class, and there's first class. Hopefully, all of them are going to get you to arrive safely. The goal is no one says, well, if I sit in coach, I'm going to crash and die. No, I'm not saying that. Everyone's going to arrive safely on the plane, right? But you might have a very different experience in first class than you have in economy or business class. So I'm saying is you might have different options. Give your management options and let them understand the level of risk associated with the different options. And so it may not be one solution fits all, but just saying no, if other people are already doing it in the industry, or your competitors are doing it, or other colleagues are doing it, you'll lose your job. You will not be the CISO for very long if all you do is say no, 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 we can't do this, can't do that, no, no, no. The answer is no. What was the question? If that's your answer, you're not going to be the CISO for long, because you've got to get to an enabling mindset. I'll stop there, Pratik. I know we're out of time.
Yeah, we can take one last question, and
Okay.
that is, can you share your thoughts on negotiating with attackers? Is this the time that you recommend as a CISO?
There are whole teams that do that specialize that. I mean, clearly, the easy answer in the US right now, a lot of people say just don't negotiate with them and just say, no, we're not going to pay the ransom. I mean, assuming you have good backups and you have good systems in place, and that you've done a really good job preparing, that's obviously the best thing. And there are many organizations, including law enforcement. There's a group called End Ransomware Now. There's a lot of different groups out there that do have ways that you can de-encrypt, the encrypted files. Certainly, those are the best steps to take. When it actually comes to negotiating with ransomware, I mean, that's a whole book in and of itself. With criminal gangs, there are people called coaches that do that for a living with lawyers, and I mean, you certainly need to make sure that all the right people are in the room, both finance, legal. You need your communication team, how you're going to communicate with the public, with your internal staff, with your partners. It is a very complex thing. It's not a 1-minute answer on how do you negotiate with the bad guys. But we cover that in the book somewhat. There are whole books just on that topic. I certainly recommend, if that were to happen to you, whether that be with your cyber insurance company who may be involved with you, or others, you need to really have an expert in that area who focuses on that, who's been trained in that, and you need to make sure they're involved and they help you. But there are whole books just on that one topic. But certainly you need to have everybody in the room. You need to be prepared for that. Work with your cyber insurance company to be prepared for that.
Thank you so much, Dan. Actually, we have received so many questions, but because of the time strain, we cannot take all the questions. And also with the question, we have received so many feedbacks. So thank you so much for your lovely presentation and the session. And thank you to our audience also. Before we conclude the webinar, would you like to give any message to our audience?
I just want to say thank you for coming and listening. Certainly encourage you to visit my blog, Lorman on Cybersecurity, where I talk about the industry trends for the coming year, 2023. Not my predictions, but the industry predictions from all the top companies. I rank them. I give awards. I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, about what's coming up. And these are really good reports. They're not my reports. They're industry reports. I do this every year. So I encourage you to visit Lorman on Cybersecurity. And I'm a big believer in the EC Council too. So it's a great organization. Certainly encourage you to get certified. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you once again. Before we end the session, I would like to announce our next Cyber Talks session, which is cybersecurity skills essential for combating cyber risks today, by Amol Kodag on 18 Jan 2023, which is tomorrow. To register this session, please do go our website, and which is www.eccu.edu/cybertalks. Hope to see you all tomorrow. On behalf of the entire CyberTalks team and our presenter, thank you once again for joining today, and have a great rest of your day. You all may disconnect the line. Thank you.